My name is Emma, and I've always been a woman who believed in the sanctity of commitment. Love to me was a tapestry woven with threads of loyalty, faithfulness, and unwavering trust. Daniel, my boyfriend of 2 years, embodied those qualities. He was the epitome of stability, calm, dependable, predictable. Our relationship was a tranquil sea, undisturbed by storms of disagreements or waves of passion. It was idyllic, comfortable, and I had convinced myself that this tranquil state equated to happiness. That summer, however, the tides of our lives shifted, carrying us in different directions. Daniel embarked on a fishing trip with his buddies, seeking camaraderie and adventure in the wilderness. I, on the other hand, craved a connection with my somewhat elusive father, a successful entrepreneur who spent most of his time traversing the globe. His invitation to visit his sprawling estate near Santa Barbara, a haven of tranquility nestled amidst rolling hills overlooking the Pacific, was an opportunity I couldn't resist. Upon arrival, I was greeted not only by my father's warm embrace, but also by the unexpected presence of Caleb, his longtime friend and business partner. Caleb, a man in his mid-40s, exuded an aura of effortless charm and quiet intensity that had always escaped my notice in previous encounters. This time, however, something was different. His presence resonated with a newfound magnetism, a confidence born from experience, and a worldliness that set him apart from the men I knew. Over the next few days, an unexpected intimacy blossomed between the three of us. We shared meals under the California sun, explored the lush gardens surrounding the estate, and engaged in conversations that stretched late into the night. With each passing hour, I found myself increasingly drawn to Caleb's enigmatic aura. Unlike Daniel's easygoing predictability, Caleb possessed a depth that both intrigued and unsettled me. He spoke of international ventures, of navigating the complexities of the business world, of life's triumphs and tribulations, his words painting a portrait of a man who had truly lived. A spark of curiosity, foreign and exhilarating, ignited within me, challenging the very foundation of my beliefs about love and happiness. One balmy evening, as the sun dipped towards the horizon, casting the sky in a symphony of gold and crimson, my father suggested we retreat to the veranda to savor the remaining warmth of the day with a bottle of his finest wine. Caleb readily agreed, and soon the three of us were enveloped in the plush comfort of wicker chairs, the gentle sea breeze carrying the distant sound of crashing waves. Though I rarely indulged in alcohol, the atmosphere seemed to call for it. As the wine flowed, so did the conversation. My father, fueled by nostalgia, recounted tales of his youth, while Caleb, with his quick wit and captivating storytelling, kept the mood light and engaging. Yet, beneath the surface of our jovial exchanges, I felt an undercurrent of something more profound, something that tugged at the edges of my awareness. With each sip of wine, each shared laugh, an invisible thread seemed to weave itself between Caleb and me. His voice, rich and resonant, held me captive. His eyes, when they met mine, lingered with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. A strange excitement, a mixture of exhilaration and trepidation, coursed through me with every stolen glance. As the night deepened, my father, weary from the day's activities, excused himself, leaving Caleb and me alone on the veranda under the watchful gaze of the stars. The departure of my father seemed to alter the very air we breathed. A palpable tension settled between us, heavy with unspoken desires and forbidden possibilities. Caleb, with a composure that belied the intensity in his eyes, poured me another glass of wine. His movements were deliberate, almost hypnotic, and I felt myself succumbing to the allure of the moment. Hesitation warred within me. Was I truly ready to cross the invisible line that separated admiration from something more dangerous? Yet, the pull of his presence, the intoxicating blend of fear and excitement, proved too strong to resist. With trembling hands, I accepted the glass he offered. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the rhythmic crashing of the waves below. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze unwavering, and the silence between us crackled with anticipation. The distant roar of the ocean seemed to mirror the turmoil within my own heart. We talked about many things, yet somehow about nothing at all. Every exchange felt like a delicate dance, graceful but charged with unspoken tension. When Caleb suddenly leaned closer to me, his presence became palpable, and my heart raced. He didn't say a word, but the look in his eyes revealed everything I feared and yet longed for. His hand brushed against mine, a fleeting touch that sent a shiver down my spine, like electricity sparking through me. That brief contact ignited a fire within me, one I had been suppressing for so long. My principles, my steadfast sense of right and wrong, began to crumble, melting away like frost under the morning sun. I knew this was wrong. I knew I should stop it before I went too far. But when Caleb leaned in, his face so close that I could feel the warmth of his breath, all my thoughts disappeared. When our lips met, it was more than just a kiss. It was an eruption of something I couldn't contain, something forbidden and exhilarating. It was as if I had bitten into the forbidden fruit I had always avoided, and now I couldn't turn back. That kiss was unlike anything I had ever experienced with Daniel. It was raw, unrestrained, and filled with a passion that overwhelmed me. I knew what I was doing was terrible, that I was betraying everything I believed in, but I couldn't stop. Caleb held me as though I were his lifeline, his salvation in a tumultuous world, and for that moment, I felt the same. I wanted nothing else. No one else. It was the first step into an abyss I had been circling for longer than I realized. When we finally pulled away, the world felt different. It wasn't just the kiss that had changed me, it was everything. Caleb's eyes still burned with the same fire, and I knew this was only the beginning. Inside, a storm was raging. I didn't know how to stop it, and a part of me didn't want to. One thing was certain. I could no longer resist what I was feeling. The next morning, I woke with a heavy sense of anxiety pressing against my chest. The night had passed in a haze, my dreams blurry and disjointed. I tried to convince myself that the kiss had been a fleeting moment of weakness, a spark that wouldn't ignite into something more. But inside, doubts clawed at me, relentless. When I entered the kitchen, I saw my father and Caleb already seated, deep in conversation about business. Caleb glanced at me briefly, his gaze lingering just a fraction longer than necessary. It was subtle, so fleeting that I might have missed it under different circumstances. But now, every glance, every small gesture from him felt loaded with meaning. I avoided meeting his eyes, focusing instead on my father's cheerful chatter. He seemed calm and content, completely oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. He talked about his plans for the next few days and suggested we take a trip into the city to visit the local landmarks. Caleb acted as though nothing had happened, his tone casual and his demeanor steady. But I knew that wasn't true. Something had shifted, and I couldn't ignore it. No matter how hard I tried, the memory of our kiss lingered, vivid and inescapable. After breakfast, my father suggested a walk along the shore. Grateful for the chance to clear my head, I agreed. The salty tang of the ocean air filled my lungs as the sunlight warmed my skin. We walked along the quiet beach, my father's voice drifting in and out as he pointed out the beauty of the coastline. I tried to focus on the rolling waves and the way the sea sparkled under the morning light. But my thoughts kept circling back to Caleb. His presence loomed behind me as we walked back to the house, a tangible weight I couldn't shake off. Every step he took seemed to echo in the silence, a constant reminder of the stolen kiss and the turmoil it had unleashed within me. My father, oblivious to the tension swirling around us, chattered about mundane matters, his voice a distant drone against the roar of my own thoughts. Once inside, he excused himself to make business calls, leaving Caleb and me alone in the suffocating quiet. The air crackled with unspoken words, with the memory of that forbidden touch. I felt like a tightrope walker, balancing precariously between fear and desire, every instinct screaming at me to flee, yet my feet rooted to the spot. Desperate for an escape, I moved to another room, but the image of the kiss haunted me, replaying in my mind like a broken record. The shame was a bitter taste in my mouth, yet it couldn't drown out the undeniable thrill of transgression. I knew it was wrong, terribly wrong, but a part of me, a dark and forbidden part, craved more. Caleb, sensing my inner turmoil, suggested we work on a project in the backyard. His voice was carefully neutral, but his eyes held a flicker of something deeper, something that mirrored the chaos in my own soul. I agreed, drawn to him like a moth to a flame, even though I knew it was a dangerous game we were playing. We worked in strained silence, the physical distance between us doing nothing to alleviate the charged atmosphere. Every rustle of leaves, every bird song seemed to amplify the tension. Then, our eyes met. His gaze was intense, raw with unspoken desire, and a wave of heat surged through me. He stepped closer, invading my personal space, and my breath hitched. My mind screamed at me to retreat, to put an end to this madness, but my body betrayed me, frozen in place by a force stronger than my will. His hand reached out, his fingers brushing against mine, and the world tilted on its axis. In that instant, I surrendered. All pretense of resistance crumbled, replaced by a raw, overwhelming need. "We shouldn't," I whispered, the words barely audible, but he silenced me with a kiss. This time it was different. It was a wildfire, consuming everything in its path. All the pent-up longing, the forbidden desires, exploded in a symphony of touch and taste. We were lost in our own world, oblivious to the fragrant blossoms and the chirping birds, existing only in the space between our lips. When we finally broke apart, I was breathless, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The world swam back into focus, but it was forever altered. This wasn't just a fleeting moment of weakness. It was a connection, a primal pull that defied logic and reason. We had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The rest of the day was a haze of guilt and confusion. Every interaction with my father felt like a betrayal, every shared meal a lie. Caleb, too, maintained a careful distance, but his stolen glances spoke volumes. We were bound by our secret, united in our forbidden desire. That night, alone in the darkness of my room, I grappled with the emotional storm raging within me. Shame warred with longing, fear with excitement. I knew I should confess to tell Daniel the truth, but the thought was agonizing. The web of deceit was tangled and complex, and I was trapped in its silken threads. The next day, my father announced that he had to leave for a few days on business and suggested I stay at the house with Caleb. His words were casual, but I could feel the weight of what they meant. I understood the danger of being alone with Caleb, yet deep down, I saw it as an opportunity to confront my feelings, to uncover what I truly wanted. Against my better judgment, I agreed, knowing full well it could lead to unpredictable consequences. My father left early in the morning, leaving behind the faint scent of his usual cologne and a strange emptiness in the house. I stood by the window, watching as his car disappeared around the corner. The realization that I was now alone with Caleb sent a ripple of unease through me. But that unease was quickly overshadowed by a surge of anticipation. I couldn't decide what frightened me more, the fact that I couldn't resist my feelings or that I didn't want to. Caleb met me in the kitchen later that morning. He was his usual calm self, but his eyes carried something new, something deeper. It was the look of a man who knew what had transpired between us and understood there was no going back. "It seems we've got the place to ourselves for a couple of days," he said, a faint smile playing on his lips, as if nothing significant had passed between us. "Yes," I replied, trying to match his nonchalance, though my voice wavered slightly. "What do you think we should do?" he asked. "Maybe just relax and enjoy the time. Your father will be back soon, and everything will return to normal." His words sounded simple, but there was an undercurrent of something unspoken. We both knew these 2 days weren't just a reprieve. They were a reckoning. a chance to understand what was happening between us and decide where it would lead. The morning passed in an uneasy rhythm of normalcy. We made breakfast together, walked through the garden, and talked about mundane topics, avoiding the storm that churned beneath the surface. But the tension grew with each passing moment. I couldn't concentrate on our conversations. My mind kept wandering back to our last kiss, to the way his hands had held me, the way his lips had moved against mine. After lunch, Caleb suggested we go into town for groceries and a change of scenery. I agreed, though I knew it was just a temporary escape from the mounting pressure within the house. The drive along the scenic coastal roads, flanked by rolling green hills, should have been relaxing, but my thoughts remained restless. Caleb was quiet beside me, his focus on the road, but his presence filled the car like a tangible force. In town, we moved through the shops, gathering what we needed, and eventually stopped at a small, cozy cafe. Caleb sat across from me, his gaze steady yet conflicted. We talked about life, about plans for the future, trivial conversations that felt hollow. They couldn't fill the space that had formed between us, a void created by everything left unsaid. His calm exterior belied the same turmoil I was feeling. I could see it in his eyes, the way they lingered on me just a second too long, the way his hand brushed mine as we passed a shopping bag. When we returned to the house, something had shifted. The silence seemed heavier, the walls closing in with the weight of what we were both avoiding. I retreated to my room, sitting on the edge of the bed as I tried to untangle the knot of emotions inside me. The tension between fear and desire had become unbearable. I knew Caleb was feeling the same pull, that strange mix of dread and longing. I tried to distract myself with a book, then a movie, but nothing worked. My thoughts always circled back to him, to what had happened and what might happen next. The desire to see him again, to talk to him, to make sense of the growing connection between us was overwhelming. At some point, I found myself standing at the door, my hand hovering over the doorknob. The stifling air on the veranda was too much to bear, so I stepped out, seeking solace in the twilight. There he was, Caleb, leaning against the railing, his silhouette a dark outline against the fiery canvas of the setting sun. My heart quickened its pace, a drumbeat echoing the intensity of our forbidden encounters. As I approached, his gaze met mine, and the world seemed to shrink, leaving only the two of us suspended in that charged moment. His eyes held the same smoldering fire I remembered from our first stolen kiss, and I knew I could no longer keep my turmoil bottled inside. "Caleb," I began, my voice a mere whisper, trembling with a mixture of apprehension and exhilaration. "What are we doing?" He released a heavy sigh, raking a hand through his tousled hair. "I don't know, Emma," he confessed, his voice a low rumble mirroring the storm brewing within me. This was never part of the plan, but now I can't seem to stop. Now I can't. His words struck a chord deep within me, a confession that echoed my own unspoken desires. I moved closer, drawn to him like a moth to a flame, the magnetic pull between us as undeniable as the sun sinking below the horizon. Caleb didn't resist, didn't step back, and in that silent acceptance, I found my answer. My hand reached out, hesitantly at first, resting on his shoulder. His hand enveloped mine, his touch a reassuring anchor in the swirling sea of my emotions. We stood like that for what felt like an eternity, bound by an unspoken understanding, the silence crackling with a tension that stretched taut between us. Finally, Caleb closed the distance, pulling me into his embrace. His lips found mine, and the world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of sensations. This kiss was different, deeper, more desperate, a raw expression of our forbidden longing. It carried the weight of our transgression, the knowledge that we were crossing lines we shouldn't, and yet neither of us could break away. My arms wound around his neck, our bodies pressed together in a symphony of forbidden desire. When we finally parted, his eyes mirrored my own, a tumultuous blend of passion, guilt, and an unspoken yearning that defied definition. The velvety darkness of night enveloped us, as we remained on the veranda, entwined in each other's arms, watching the stars emerge like diamonds scattered across the inky expanse. It was a stolen moment of tranquility, a fragile bubble of peace before the inevitable storm. The future stretched before us, a hazy landscape filled with impossible choices and potential heartbreak. But in that singular, perfect moment, none of it mattered. We were together, and that was the only reality that held any weight. I awoke to the gentle caress of sunlight filtering through the curtains, painting the room in a soft, golden hue. A feather-light touch on my cheek brought me fully into consciousness, and there he was, Caleb, standing by my bedside, his eyes ablaze with the same raw passion I had witnessed the night before. For a fleeting second, the line between dream and reality blurred. My heart pounded in my chest as his hand traced the contours of my face, sending shivers down my spine. "Emma," he murmured, his voice husky with emotion. He leaned down, his breath warm against my skin, and in that instant, all hesitation vanished. There were no more barriers, no more holding back. His lips met mine, a tentative exploration at first, as if testing the waters of our newfound intimacy. But the kiss quickly escalated, becoming a fervent expression of our pent-up desires. A fire ignited within me, consuming all doubts and fears. My body responded with an urgency that surprised even me, as if it had been yearning for this release. The world outside faded into insignificance, leaving only the two of us, caught in a whirlwind of forbidden passion. The kiss was an explosion, a release of all we'd held back for so long. It wasn't just lips meeting, it was a collision of souls, a desperate yearning finally given voice. Caleb's hand moved to my neck, his touch sending shivers down my spine, a current of electricity that ignited a fire within me. My own hands, as if with a will of their own, reached out, pulling him closer, embracing him with a fervor I never knew I possessed. He kissed me deeply, his lips trailing fire from my face to my neck, each touch erasing any lingering doubt. In that moment, there was only Caleb, his presence filling my senses, his warmth chasing away the chill of apprehension. My body responded instinctively, yielding to his touch, guided by a force beyond reason or restraint. With a gentle urgency, he pulled the blanket away, his hands exploring my body with a reverence that made my breath catch in my throat. I closed my eyes, surrendering to the wave of sensations, allowing myself to be consumed by the moment. For the first time in my life, I let go of everything. The expectations, the societal constraints, the carefully constructed walls around my heart. Caleb's body pressed against mine, his warmth a comforting refuge against the reality we were defying. This wasn't some fleeting fantasy. It was real, raw, and electrifying. Our breaths mingled, our movements finding a natural rhythm, a dance as old as time, a language spoken without words. His hands traced patterns on my skin, mapping every curve, every contour, as if memorizing me, branding me as his. His lips, his breath, were everywhere, leaving a trail of fire in their wake. With each kiss, I felt myself shedding the layers of who I thought I was, becoming someone new, someone awakened. I stopped fighting, surrendering to the tide of emotions and sensations that threatened to overwhelm me. My body and mind met his passion with an intensity that mirrored his own. Every touch was a spark, igniting a flame that consumed the remnants of my former self, leaving me exposed, vulnerable, and vibrantly alive. We lost ourselves in each other, the world fading away, leaving only the two of us in that sacred space. We were no longer Emma and Caleb, bound by societal roles and expectations. We were simply two souls stripped bare, finally finding solace in each other's arms. The aftermath was a quiet stillness, a profound sense of peace. I lay in Caleb's embrace, my breath returning to a steady rhythm, my body sated, my soul filled with a newfound lightness. It wasn't just the physical intimacy. It was a sense of discovery, of unearthing a part of myself I never knew existed. Caleb held me close, his hand gently stroking my back. a silent affirmation of the connection we had forged. The silence between us was profound, a shared understanding that transcended words. In that moment, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. This day had irrevocably altered the course of our lives. We were no longer just two people caught in a fleeting moment of weakness. We were bound, connected by an invisible thread woven from passion and vulnerability. And though the future remained uncertain, the weight of consequences seemed insignificant compared to the profound truth we had discovered in each other's arms. Dawn arrived with a gentle insistence, sunlight filtering through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the room. I opened my eyes, momentarily disoriented, until I felt the comforting weight of Caleb beside me, his steady breath a reassuring presence. It wasn't a dream. I lay there, still and silent, absorbing the reality of what had transpired. The choices that lay ahead, the inevitable consequences, they all seemed distant, unimportant in the face of the overwhelming truth of this moment. For now we were here, together, and that was all that mattered. We had crossed the line I had feared for so long, a line I knew couldn't be undone. As I carefully slipped away from Caleb's arms, trying not to wake him, my heart pounded in my chest, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts. I knew I needed to figure out what would come next, but I couldn't focus. Inside me, a battle raged, satisfaction and an intoxicating sense of joy on one side, guilt and dread on the other. The image of Daniel, the man I had promised my loyalty to, flashed in my mind, and with it came the fear of what might happen if my father discovered the truth. Caleb stirred, his movements gentle as his eyes fluttered open. He looked at me with the same warmth and tenderness he had shown the night before, a gaze free of doubt or regret. He didn't seem afraid. Perhaps he was better at masking his emotions, or maybe he truly believed in what we had done. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice deep and slightly hoarse from sleep, but carrying that same reassuring gentleness. "Good morning," I replied, my voice trembling as a wave of embarrassment washed over me. Caleb simply smiled, pulling me closer, his touch grounding me in a way that both comforted and terrified me. "Emma," he began softly, "do you regret anything?" His gaze was steady, searching mine with a mixture of tenderness and concern. I held my breath, my heart caught in a storm of conflicting emotions. Did I regret it? That question had been haunting me from the moment I opened my eyes. I knew what had happened was wrong, a betrayal of Daniel and of the trust my father placed in both of us. And yet, when I thought of the night I spent with Caleb, I couldn't deny that I had never felt more alive. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so confused, Caleb. I don't know what to do next." His expression softened, his hand brushing gently against my cheek as if he could erase the chaos within me. "We'll figure it out," he said with quiet confidence. "We just need time to think." I nodded, but a deep unease settled in my chest. Time was the very thing I feared most. The longer we delayed, the harder it would be to face the inevitable decisions looming over us. Yet I also couldn't imagine walking away from what we had. The bond between us was too strong, too deeply rooted now to simply let go. We spent the morning trying to focus on ordinary things, chatting about mundane topics, as if we could will the tension away. But it was impossible to ignore the unspoken weight hanging between us. "Let's take a walk along the coast," Caleb suggested, his voice calm but carrying an undertone of urgency. The fresh air might help clear our heads. I agreed, desperate for anything to bring me some clarity. The sea breeze tangled through my hair as the sound of the waves filled the silence between us. We strolled along the beach, our steps sinking as we walked at the edge of the water. Caleb's hand brushed against mine, and in that fleeting touch, I felt the undeniable connection between us pull me closer once again. When his fingers laced through mine, I didn't resist. I couldn't. We stopped at the water's edge, the waves gently lapping at our feet. I turned to him, and his gaze met mine, intense and filled with the same turmoil I felt within myself. "Emma," he murmured, his voice heavy with unspoken emotions. "What are we going to do?" I asked, my words breaking the fragile silence. His hand tightened around mine, his jaw clenching as though he were wrestling with the same questions that plagued me. In his eyes, I saw both fear and hope, a reflection of my own heart. Caleb's lips found mine again, but this time the kiss was different. It wasn't just a spark, it was a wildfire, a consuming blend of tenderness and desperation that ignited a truth within me I could no longer ignore. In that moment, with the salty air swirling around us and the rhythmic crash of waves serenading our transgression, I knew I loved him. The realization struck me with the force of a rogue wave, leaving me breathless and terrified. This wasn't a fleeting infatuation. It was a deep-rooted connection, nurtured by stolen glances, whispered confessions, and forbidden touches. But like the tide that inevitably recedes, I knew this moment couldn't last. Choices loomed, consequences awaited, and the truth threatened to shatter the delicate world we had created. Yet for now, I allowed myself to be swept away, savoring the intoxicating sweetness of the present, clinging to the fragile beauty of our stolen moments before the inevitable storm broke. Returning to the house felt like stepping into an altered reality. The familiar rooms, once filled with innocence, now vibrated with the echoes of our passion. The very walls seemed to hold their breath, bearing witness to the forbidden bond we had forged. This was no longer just a house. It was a sanctuary of secrets, a silent accomplice in our love affair. That night, sleep eluded me. My mind was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions, a relentless cycle of questions with no easy answers. How could I face my father when he returned, knowing the betrayal I carried within me? How could I look at Daniel, my kind and unsuspecting fiancé, without the weight of my deceit crushing me? Yet despite the guilt gnawing at my conscience, one thing remained clear. Caleb had irrevocably woven himself into the fabric of my being, and the thought of a life without him was unbearable. I knew this tranquility was fleeting, a fragile calm before the inevitable storm. But in the darkness of my room, with only the distant whisper of the ocean to keep me company, I clung to these stolen moments, these precious memories, like a lifeline in a turbulent sea. Dawn broke, painting the sky with hues of rose and gold, but the bed beside me was cold. Caleb was gone, leaving behind only the faintest trace of his cologne on the pillow. My fingers traced the outline of his body, a phantom warmth lingering on the sheets, and a wave of emptiness washed over me. The house, once a haven, now felt suffocating, each creaking floorboard and whispering curtain a reminder of our stolen intimacy. Unable to bear the weight of my thoughts, I escaped outside, seeking solace in the invigorating embrace of the ocean breeze. The crisp morning air filled my lungs, but it couldn't dispel the turmoil within. My mind remained a battlefield, thoughts of Caleb clashing with the stark reality of my situation. I was trapped in a web of my own making, with no escape in sight. Returning to the house, I found Caleb in the kitchen, his movements practiced as he prepared breakfast. He looked so at ease, so normal, that for a fleeting moment, I almost convinced myself that the previous day had been a figment of my imagination. But then our eyes met, and the unspoken truth flared between us, a connection as undeniable as the sunrise. "Good morning," he said, his voice a gentle caress that belied the tension swirling around us. "Good morning," I replied, my voice a mask concealing the tempest raging within. We sat down to breakfast, engaging in mundane conversation, the weather, household chores, the day's plans. But beneath the surface, an unspoken tension crackled, a thick fog of anticipation and dread that neither of us could penetrate. The fragile peace shattered with the sharp intrusion of a car engine. My heart hammered against my ribs as I recognized the familiar sound. My father. Panic seized me, my hands clammy, my breath shallow. I glanced at Caleb, who, despite his outward composure, couldn't entirely mask the flicker of apprehension in his eyes. "Emma, it will be all right," he murmured, his voice a calming balm, though his words offered little reassurance. I knew it wouldn't be all right, My father's arrival signaled the end of our stolen sanctuary, the end of our blissful ignorance. The charade was over. The door swung open and my father entered, his familiar presence filling the room. His face lit up with a smile as he saw me, and he enveloped me in a warm embrace. "There's my girl," he boomed, his voice filled with paternal affection. I forced a smile, my insides twisting with guilt and fear. Caleb stood silently in the background, his expression unreadable. And so the next chapter began, a chapter fraught with uncertainty, guilt, and a love that refused to be extinguished. And so the next chapter began, a chapter fraught with uncertainty, guilt, and a love that refused to be extinguished. Above is part 1 of the story. Comment number 2 if you want to hear the rest.